A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. We will start the day today with the theme of the day. Today we'll take up ecology, and in that we'll take up the topic of corals. So first you will have to find out the types of corals, reefs, like there is a barrier reef, atolls, fringe reefs. So like that you have to identify the types of the coral reefs, and then what are the conditions which are favorable for formation of the coral reefs. Then you also have to identify the regions where the coral reefs are found, both in India as well as across the world. Then you have to find out the threats, the reasons why there is this extinction of the coral reefs, or you have to find out the reasons for the coral bleaching that is happening. And you'll also have to find out few exceptions. For example, there are few corals which don't form the reef, and while you look at the conditions for the formation, you will see that it mostly forms in tropical waters, but there are some corals which form in non-tropical waters as well, and they don't form reefs. So you have to identify such exceptions as well. So if you have a question on corals in which one of the statement is all corals form reefs, then that will become an incorrect statement. So you will have to be aware of such exceptions as well. And many of you have written very good answers for yesterday's question, so keep that coming. And now we'll the first topic of the day. So we have more number of topics to cover, so we'll be a little quicker today. So first topic is on Rabindranath Tagore. So this might come as a part of your GS1 syllabus, where these personalities or who are part of the Indian national movement are asked, and their ideas about various things are asked. So in this case, Rabindranath Tagore and his ideas on education can be asked, and also you may be asked a comparison between Tagore and Gandhiji on their idea of how education should be imparted. So on the one hand, Gandhiji did not support the learning of science of the Western civilization among the Indians, but Rabindranath Tagore supported that. He felt that only when we keep ourselves completely aware of the scientific developments that is happening elsewhere in the world, we can progress. So that was Rabindranath Tagore's views on education. So in this article, we'll be discussing few of his views on education. First of all, this can be used whenever you are writing an essay on education, that how this model could be implemented even today. And secondly, you can use it in your GS1 answers if you are asked to write about Rabindranath Tagore's views on education and his model of education. So first, he founded the Vishwa Bharati in 1920s, and this in 1951, that is after India's independence, this became a central university. So from the name itself, you can feel that you can see Vishwa means world, and Bharati is derived from the word Bharat, that is India. So therefore, through Vishwa Bharati, what Rabindranath Tagore aimed to do is to bring together both India and world. So it is a communion of world with India. So this precisely was his view on education, that everything, the internationalism, humanism and universal brotherhood should be the foundations of education, and India should be kept, the Indians should be kept aware of the happenings in the world, and the international ethics and the international values should overall be taught in the schools. Also very critical of the traditional schools. He believed that these traditional schools are usually confined to the four walls of the classroom, and they don't happen in nature. So because nature is the best teacher according to him, and education should rather happen with the nature, but the traditional schools, it happens within just the four walls. Also, they follow a very rigid curriculum, which again limits the boundaries of the student to explore his own creativity and imagination. Therefore, such schools act as a prison for the students. So this was Rabindranath Tagore's views on traditional schools. In order to set up a new model which incorporates all his principles of education, he started the Shantiniketan. So in this, he wanted to bring education very close to nature. So therefore, even the classes were conducted in open air itself. So he believed that nature is the best teacher, and he also firmly believed that there has to be fusion of education with life. So they must be closely linked, and education should not be completely divorced of one's lives. So, going by his philosophy of being close to the nature and education in the lap of the nature, several festivals were also celebrated in Shantiniketan. For example, the Basant Utsav. So, this Basant Utsav used to encourage the interaction, be it economic, cultural, or social, between Shantiniketan and the neighboring villages also. So, this celebration of these festivals facilitated such interaction and also brought education more close to the lives of the people, and it was also conducted in the lap of the nature. So, Vishwa Bharati had a motto which says that where world makes a home is in a single nest. So the motto is where world makes a home in a single nest. This shows that he believed in a model of education that is inclusive, that is secular, and that has an international character. So first you can use this in an essay where you can say that this is the motto of the Vishwa Bharati that was set up by Tagore, and this believes in an inclusive and a secular model of education. So even when you are analyzing the NEP 2020, the New Education Policy 2020, in the conclusion you can write that our educational system should be based on the Vishwa Bharati's motto, that is where world makes a home in a single nest. So that means we must have an educational system that is inclusive and also secular in character. So through this way you can give a very good conclusion to your answer on analysis of NEP. Now we'll move on to a quote by Rabindranath Tagore, which you can use it in your essays. The quote says, "You cannot cross the sea merely by standing and staring at the water." So this quote can be used in essays where you will have to take an alternative path, where you will have to travel the path that is less followed by, that is less explored, and you will have to take that risk and initiative and leadership in life to try out a different path. So you cannot cross the sea merely by standing and staring at the water. So this is a quote of Rabindranath Tagore which can be used in essays. We'll now move on to the second topic, which is related to unity and communal harmony. So this can be used in your GS paper 1, which talks about the society, communal harmony and all that. And it can also come as a part of your GS2 paper, which talks of secularism being a basic structure of the constitution. So mostly the contents of this particular editorial can be used in essay, that is the most important application. This whole article was written by the Vice President Venkaiah Naidu, and he gives a very good picture of how our society has in the past been divided and how India, as a result of such divisions, had to face a lot of troubles and backwardness, and it is only when people stand united that we can progress. So this whole thing he has traced it back right from the historical perspective. So this can become a very good introduction of an essay on communal harmony or unity in diversity. So the way this article starts is, it starts by mentioning about Muhammad Ghazni, who has done more than 1,001 raids and invasion on India, and he destroyed several properties and he looted a lot of wealth from India. Then came the British rule, who again exploited India and also drained a lot of wealth from India. So by giving these examples, Venkaiah Naidu says that why did this happen? Why were they able to exploit India? That is because we had certain inherent weaknesses which were exploited by these people. The first thing, that we did not have a sense of belongingness. So this sense of belongingness was absent in India. And secondly, there was no unity, whether it was unity in action or whether it is unity of purpose. There were several rulers who lacked among themselves unity of action or unity of purpose, and there was no sense of belongingness to one particular nation. So because of these inherent weaknesses, India became a soft target for the British colonial rule, or for that matter for the invasions by Muhammad Ghani. So the result was that India, as I said, became a soft target, and India was exploited and looted by these people. So basically the result of all this is that you can see how in the past we have had some solo campaigns by whether it was Prithviraj Chauhan or Maharana Pratap, Jhansi Lakshmibai, they were just solo examples. But apart from that, overall, India became a soft target for these invasions that happened in the history. So it says the reason for all this is that India had a divided society. So this divided society gave rise to a divided nation, and this divided nation in turn it led India to suffer from disgrace, and it fell into deep poverty and backwardness. Therefore, India started to lose its soul as well as inner strength. So we can see how this internal weakness of India, where there was no sense of belongingness and there was no unity of action or purpose, and people were divided among themselves, you can see how this divided society led to a divided nation, which in turn led India to suffer from disgrace, and also this in turn led to an ocean of poverty and backwardness, ultimately leading India to lose out its soul and inner strength. So this all happened mainly because there was lack of belongingness to one particular nation among the Indians. Indians were divided among themselves. So these are all the implications of India not being united. Then came the freedom movement, which tried to unite all the Indians. The freedom movement thus brought several people together to shape their destiny. So in this context, noted economist Utsa Patnaik has made a number of findings which we'll be discussing related to how the British Raj ruined India and exploited India. So the findings of Utsa Patnaik are based on 2 centuries of data on tax and trade. The first observation is related to the wealth that is drained by the British Empire in India. So the British drained nearly $45 trillion between 1765 to 1938. So this amount was nearly 17 times the GDP of the United Kingdom. This was the amount of wealth that was drained from India during the British colonial rule. The second is related to the per capita income. So colonial rule, if we say, was for over 200 years. During this 200 years, India's per capita income almost did not increase at all. It remained stagnant almost for this 200 years of colonial rule. The third is the average life expectancy. The average life expectancy between 1870 to 1920 had declined by almost a fifth during the colonial rule. So all of these findings by Utsa Patnaik point to the fact that when India was divided, how badly it was exploited by a colonial rule. So the lesson that we understand from all this is the united we stand and divided we fall. So the solution to all of this was the Indian national movement, through which Indians came together to shape their destiny. So to come out of all this harassment, exploitation rule that the British colonial rule was in India, the lesson that we learned was that if we stand united, then nobody can divide us, and nobody can rule over us if we stand united. So therefore, what Venkaiah Naidu says that what should be the way forward in India is, first we have to remember this lesson from history. History has taught us this very clearly, that united we stand, divided we fall. So this lesson in the first place should never be forgotten. After that, we need to follow this idea of 3I. The first I is the integration. That is, we need an emotionally integrated India. So that is very important, that there is an emotional integration of each one of us with India as a country and also among its people. We must understand that all people are the same. There is equality and brotherhood among people. So therefore, this emotional integration with India is very important. The second is the identity. So when we talk of identity, we must strongly identify ourselves with the country, that is India, rather than the narrow identities based on caste or community or religion. So this identity should be more an Indian identity. A strong sense of Indianness must prevail among all of us. So this is the identity. The third I is the interest. So whenever we talk of interest, there must be a deep commitment to the national interest, that which is in the interest of the country, rather than narrow interests which are related to one's own caste or religion. So this interest should always be the national interest, to which we must be deeply committed to. So these are the 3 I's that we must follow if we look at the way forward, and also to keep in mind the lesson that our history has taught us, that united we stand, divided we fall. So this can be a very important content for your essay on communal harmony. Now we'll move on to the next topic related to defense indigenization. This is a part of your GS3 syllabus which talks of defense and security. So the recent news is that the government has banned the import of 101 defense equipments and platforms. So 101 defense equipment items has been now banned by the government, and they are not going to be imported into India. Now let's see what are all the various features of this recent step taken by the government. So as we said, the government is banning nearly 101 weapons, platforms and equipments, and then this list of the equipments, platforms or weapons that have been banned includes say snipers, includes rifles, it includes short range surface to air missiles, it includes light combat aircraft, mini unmanned aerial vehicles, light machine gun. So all of these are some of the equipments which have been now banned for import under this list of 101 items which have been banned for import. So then when this thing is going to be effective, this is going to be effective starting from December 2020, and also this has been made progressive. That means this list is going to be progressive. We have started with a list of 101 items, but in the future this is going to be expanded to include more and more items. So therefore there will be further bans on further imports on various other items as well in the future. So now we'll see why is it that India has taken such a step, because for over a decade India has been one of the top 3 defense importers. So we need to reduce our import bill. This is one reason. Second is the border threats have also increased recently with China and has always been with Pakistan. So in order to counter these border threats, we need to improve our defense preparedness, particularly our indigenous defense manufacturing should be strengthened. So in the light of these border threats also, India wants to support the domestic manufacturing. The third is a self-reliance. So we have been dependent on imports from various other countries for even some of the basic defense requirements. So India now has started with a project of self-reliance or Atmanirbhar Bharat. So under this, defense sector is one of the most important sectors in which we need to achieve self-reliance. And in fact, self-reliance in the defense has been our priority, especially after 1999 Kargil war, where we realized that we have been too much dependent on defense imports. Next is that this too much dependence, because being dependent on countries like United States and Russia for our defense imports in the future can also lead to showing up of our vulnerabilities, that where we are lacking. So much dependence in the kind of world where the friendships are being very volatile. So this too much dependence on some of the countries is again problematic. Next is through banning the imports of these items and encouraging domestic manufacturing, government also wants to support employment generation, job generation in the country. So in order to ensure that this particular step bears fruit, the government has also bifurcated the defense procurement budget. So that is, government has been saying that that government is going to encourage and promote defense indigenization. So in order to ensure that defense indigenization does happen, government has bifurcated the defense procurement budget into a domestic defense procurement budget and a foreign defense procurement budget. So a separate budget head for domestic defense procurement, which has been set at 52,000 crore. So this is the capital that has been allocated for domestic procurement. So this ensures that the domestic industry will be promoted as a part of the defense procurement by government. So there has always been this concern by the domestic industry that government has not committed on the procurement from domestic industries. By allocating a separate head under the budget for this, government has ensured that this concern of the domestic industries is now removed. So through allocating the separate budget, government has shown its commitment on procuring from the domestic players. Now we will analyze this measure by the government to ban the imports of 101 items and see if this is really going to help defense indigenization. So the first issue is related to the failure of Make in India. So this particular measure by the government to ban the imports of 101 items, it also comes with a promise by the government that it is going to spend nearly 4 lakh crore. This much amount of procurement it is going to do from the domestic defense industries in the next 5 to 7 years. So this has been promised by the government that in the coming 5 to 7 years, nearly 4 lakh crore of defense procurement the government is going to do from the domestic industries. Though this promise is very impressive, but will it really work is a question. Because even under Make in India, projects worth 3.5 lakh crore were announced. But however, all of these projects have got stuck in the pipeline and they have not seen the light of the day. So this similar thing may also happen to this promise of procuring nearly 4 lakh crore worth of defense goods from the domestic industry. So this is one issue. The second is the issue with the items that have been listed in this list. So there are 101 items, but some of these items in the list, for instance, the assault rifles. So these assault rifles are produced by the Ordnance Factory Board, but this is produced in collaboration with Russia. So the Ordnance Factory Board and Russia don't seem to agree on the pricing of these rifles. So there is no agreement on the pricing. So this is stuck over the pricing issue itself. So now by banning the import of this item, how India is going to produce, how Ordnance Factory Board is going to produce this, when and how government is going to procure this domestically when this thing is stuck because of the pricing issues. So there are some specific issues with respect to the items that find a mention in this list of 101 items. The next issue is that in this list of 101 items are mostly those items which already have a proven technology. So it does not include those items which involve any critical or any cutting edge technology. So therefore it means that the government does not seem to encourage domestic manufacturing in those areas which involve critical or cutting edge technology. So it is going to procure only those items from the domestic industry for which technology is already proven. So therefore this cutting edge technology is not getting promoted in the domestic industry by the government. So this is another issue. And the last issue is related to the economy of the orders. So even when the government is saying that it is going to procure from the domestic private players, the domestic players, but it is still the private sector is or the domestic players are still not assured that the government is going to give them enough orders that the production can become economical. So defense production can become economical when the orders are huge in number or there is more certainty and periodicity in the orders. So the domestic industry, the domestic defense manufacturing sector has not yet got this assurance that government is going to give it enough orders that will make the production of these defense items more economical for these industries. So this is an analysis of the recent measure of the government to ban the 101 items for import. So now we will move on to this topic, which is related to disasters, and in that we'll be talking about landslides. This will be a part of your it can be a part of your GS1 paper, which it talks about geography and the various phenomena, or it can also be part of your GS3 paper, which talks about disaster management. So recently it was in news that in Idukki district in Kerala, the landslides have killed more than 20 people. So even in the past in Kerala, there have been devastating floods, and that has given rise to a large number of landslides or landslips in the fragile Western Ghats ecology. So in this regard, we'll be looking at two important data that can give us how severe the landslides have been and why it is important to take measures to address them. So first is the Geological Survey of India. So Geological Survey of India has noted that in Kerala, nearly 67 major landslides have happened between 1961 and 2013. So this is one data, and it also gives you a hint that whenever you're writing any answer on landslides, do make a mention of Geological Survey of India and write its observations that Geological Survey of India has noted that the incidence of the landslides has been increasing in India. So whatever it is, make a mention of Geological Survey of India, which is a relevant body when you're writing about landslides. The second important thing is the National Landslide Susceptibility Mapping Program. So this particular program was mapping, it has mapped areas in Western Ghats, it has mapped areas in the northeastern India, in Jammu and Kashmir, Uttarakhand. It has mapped those areas which are vulnerable to landslides. So it has mapped nearly 13,000 square kilometers of area was mapped till 2018 to be susceptible to landslides. So again, this mapping program needs to find a mention in your answers whenever you're writing about landslides. So this particular mapping program was mainly to find out those areas which are susceptible to landslides and accordingly implement zoning laws in those areas. So zoning laws means limitations on construction activity on residential houses and other economical activities and commercial activities. But even in these areas which have been identified as susceptible to landslides, these zoning laws are barely implemented. So this is what we need to be doing in the way forward, that these zoning laws need to be properly implemented, at least in these areas which have been identified by this mapping program to be vulnerable for landslides. So what we learned from this whole example of the Idukki landslide is that the devastating floods and the climate change induced extreme weather events and rainfall will further give rise to more number of landslide incidences in the future. And when you are writing about landslides, you have to make a mention of Geological Survey of India and also about the National Landslide Susceptibility Mapping Program. So now we'll move on to the topic which is related to India-Pakistan relations. So in the last class we have seen India-Pakistan issues. One is the cartographic challenge, where Pakistan has come out with a new political map showing entire Jammu and Kashmir and even Gujarat till Junagadh also as part of Pakistan. The second we saw was the fishermen issue between the two countries who are languishing in the jails of Pakistan, and how the judicial committee has not been set up to solve this issue. And today we'll be looking at the Indus Water Treaty and the river water dispute between India and Pakistan. So this Indus Water Treaty was signed in 1960, which divided the rights of these two countries on the Indus River water. So India got rights over the eastern rivers of Ravi, Satluj and Beas, while Pakistan got the rights over Jhelum, Chenab and Indus. But however, the Indus Water Treaty also told that in these three western rivers on which Pakistan has the control, that is Chenab, Indus and Jhelum, on these three western rivers, India can build run-of-the-river projects. Run-of-the-river projects means the dam will be built, but however the dam is not going to store a lot of water, because storing water in these dams can impact the downstream availability of water in Pakistan. So India can build dams, but they cannot store water. Rather, they should be the run-of-the-river type of projects. So Indus Water Treaty itself gave this right to India, that India has a right to build run-of-the-river projects on the three western rivers of Chenab, Jhelum and Indus. So these dams should not impede the water flow in the Pakistan in the downstream. So this was the condition. But however, now Pakistan has objected to India's construction of Rattle power project that is coming up in the Chenab in Jammu and Kashmir. So this is a run-of-the-river project that India is going to build in Chenab in Jammu Kashmir. So Pakistan has objected to this, that this particular project or this particular dam is going to impede the water availability in Pakistan downstream. So however, on how this issue is to be resolved, also there are differences. For instance, Pakistan wants to take this issue to the court of arbitration, but India feels that if this issue is taken to the court of arbitration, then it will completely stall not just the construction of this dam, but several other dams which are proposed on the rivers. But therefore what India wants is, India wants to appoint a neutral party which can decide upon this dispute between India and Pakistan. So it is not just the issue regarding the Rattle project that is being built on Chenab, but also how this issue needs to be resolved, whether through a neutral party or through court of arbitration. On how the issue is to be resolved, on that also there is an issue between India and Pakistan. So this is the latest issue when you talk of the Indus Water Treaty, which has been an important issue between India and Pakistan. So in fact, the Indus Water Treaty was in news much in 2016 after the Uri attack, where the Prime Minister had made a comment that blood and water cannot flow together. So in that case, newspapers ran several articles analyzing what will be the impact if India blocked the flow of Indus water into Pakistan. So in that context, in 2016, the Indus Water Treaty was in news. So this is the latest issue related to the operation of this treaty between the two countries. Now we'll move on to the next topic, which is related to the reservation issues. So this can be part of your GS2 syllabus, which talks about various policies by the government for the vulnerable sections, and also the reservation issue. It involves the important articles of the Constitution like Article 15 and 16. So it can be part of your various constitutional, the basic structure of the Constitution also. So first we will see what the recent news is, and then we will analyze it. So recently in 2019, Parliament has come out with a Constitutional Amendment Act, which is the 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act. So now this particular act has provided 10% reservation for the economically weaker sections in educational institutions and also in the government jobs. So 103rd Constitutional Amendment Act provides 10% reservation in government jobs and educational institutions. So this is about the amendment, but this amendment was challenged in the Supreme Court, and because this particular amendment involves at least 3 important issues which give rise to substantial question of law, this particular challenge in the Supreme Court has now been assigned to a 5-judge constitutional bench. So first, see the substantial questions of law which are involved in this particular case. First is the issue related to the economic criteria. So whether economic criteria can alone be the basis to determine the backwardness of a community, that is one substantial question of law which the Supreme Court should answer. The second thing is, by providing this 10% reservation to the economically weaker sections, the government will be breaching the 50% cap which was put by the Supreme Court itself in the Indira Sawhney case. So this 50% cap on the total reservation, this is going to be breached if 10% of seats are reserved for the economically weaker sections. So this is another substantial question of law which the Supreme Court should address. And the third is the right of unaided private educational institutions. So they have the right to run the affairs of their educational institutions, to administer their affairs according to their own principles. So if government is coming out with these reservation policies, this hinders their right to administer their affairs in these educational institutions. So this is the third substantial question of law which needs to be addressed by the Supreme Court. Now let us see that what was the challenge, this particular Amendment Act, on what grounds was it challenged, and what was the reply of the government to this. So this can serve as your arguments and counter arguments in support and against of particular act. So the first challenge was that this providing 10% reservation to the economically weaker section violates the basic structure of Constitution, because providing special protection for socially disadvantaged groups comes as a part of it's actually a part of the basic structure of Constitution. But this 103rd Amendment of the Constitution, it is giving protection on the basis of economic status, in fact on the sole basis of economic status, whereas giving special protection for socially disadvantaged groups forms a basic structure of Constitution. So by giving protection on the sole basis of economic status, it is going to violate the basic structure of Constitution. So as a counter argument to this, the government has said that whenever any constitutional amendment is challenged in the court that it is unconstitutional, then it has to be shown that that particular amendment it is actually altering the very identity of the constitution. So therefore the petitioners will have to show that this particular amendment is trying to alter the very identity of the constitution. Also, the government is saying that government also has a duty to perform under Article 46, which comes under the directive principles of state policy. Article 46 states that the state will promote educational and economical interests of the weaker sections of the people, especially the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and also protect them from social injustice and all forms of exploitation. So therefore, the government under Article 46, which is a part of the DPSP, is duty bound to promote the educational and economical interests of the weaker sections. So therefore, there is nothing wrong in the step that the government has taken. The second challenge is that this particular measure by the government is violating the Indira Sawhney judgment of the Supreme Court that came out in 1992. This particular judgment, the Indira Sawhney judgment, first of all upheld the Mandal report, which called for reservation for the other backward classes. And secondly, Indira Sawhney judgment also put a cap of 50% on the total reservation that is given. So also in this case, Supreme Court held that economic criteria alone cannot be a criteria for identifying the backward class. So that is, economic backwardness cannot be the sole criteria for identifying the backward class. These were the three important outcomes of the Indira Sawhney judgment. First is that it accepted the Mandal report. Second, it put a cap of 50% on the total reservation. And third, it held that economic backwardness cannot be the sole criteria for identifying the backward classes. As a counter to this, the government came out by quoting the Ashok Kumar Thakur case. Ashok Kumar Thakur case, the judgment came out in 2008. In this particular case, Supreme Court held that the 27% quota which has been given to the OBCs, for this the OBCs are identified on a mix of caste-based criteria and economic-based criteria. So therefore, the OBCs which are identified by the center for implementing this 27% quota, this identification of the OBCs is based on a mix of caste and economic criteria. So by quoting this judgment, the government is trying to say that the court itself has accepted that criteria of economic status has also been accepted by the court in the past. So this is the argument of government. The third challenge has been that the right of private unaided educational institutions to run their affairs independently, administer their affairs independently, is a part of their fundamental right. So as a counter to this, the government has said that, however, the constitution itself allows that the parliament can place in some reasonable restrictions on the way these institutes carry out their trade or business. So this comes under the reasonable restrictions and therefore is well within the spirit of the constitution. So these challenges and the government's reply can be used as your arguments to support the 103rd constitutional amendment and the argument against the 10% reservation for EWS. So now we will look at these other articles which were not relevant from the exam point of view. So today's prelims question based on the current affairs is, recently the World Wildlife Crime Report 2020 was released. This was released by which body? UNEP, Traffic, UNODC, or Wildlife Crime Control Bureau. So and those who are regularly watching ICANN and making notes, they should know answer to this question, because I have discussed the findings of this report briefly in one of our previous classes. So and also one question on the report is mandatorily coming in the previous UPSC exams. So a report and which body the report is released by is one common question you will find in all the papers. So these 2 marks can be in your pocket if you know the answer. So find the answer to this. That's it for today. Thank you.